morning and welcome. We have a packed hour ahead for you, and we begin one-on-one with Secretary of State John Kerry.
I sat down with Mr. Kerry in Miami before his speech at Miami-Dade College on Thursday. He had inspirational words and advice for the students at the Freedom Tower ceremony. He said, embrace diversity and the American dream. Don't listen to any naysayers and prophets of doom who say things like they want to make America great again. The name Trump was never spoken by Kerry, but it was clear that's who he was talking about. Kerry also met with some Cuban-American leaders who support normalizing relations with Cuba, and Cuba was where I began our conversation. Mr. Secretary, welcome. Great to speak with you.
Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, about Cuba. Ever since December 17th, 2014, you and President Obama, Roberta Jacobson, who is in the room, others have been working toward normalization. Even some people in this community who think that 50 years of isolation didn't work look at what has happened and say, we've given the Castro government everything. What have we gotten in return?
We haven't given them everything. In fact, we really haven't given them anything per se, because we have ended a silence that I think strengthened them. Their ability to be able to use the United States as the whipping boy and always say, well, we can't do this and that because we have to continue this great glorious fight against the United States, right, is over. We're ready to normalize. We want a normal relationship. We want them to behave normally in the process. So now the focus is on their behavior, their choices, how they treat their citizens, whether their citizens can meet their expectations. And we are no longer standing in the way of that. Obviously, we want to lift the embargo, but the key to lifting the embargo is for them to make some moves on human rights, to open up their system a little more, to deal with businesses more effectively, to begin to prove that they're ready, in fact, to have what they say they want, which is a relationship with the rest of the world. Right. There's a responsibility on them. And what's happened since we began this process, there are many more Cubans now working for the private sector. Right. There are many more people traveling and going to Cuba and exchanging views.
Yeah, 1.5 million Americans this year are expected to go.
Well, every one of them that communicates with somebody, these are real discussions between real people that are going to take place. In addition, we have seen the Cuban government actually move and create a number of hotspots for internet use. Internet use is up. That's one of the parts of the agreement is there has to be more availability of connectivity to the internet for the people of Cuba. And I think nobody expected this to be an overnight transformation. Right. It will take some time, but already there are clear indications that there's just a greater sense of expectation and possibility, and people in Cuba, I think, are thrilled that we have opened up this engagement with diplomatic relations.
Right. Mr. Secretary, this week you and the State Department released your annual report on human rights, and you cited Cuba, but in the last 15 months or so, according to the Cuban Commission on Human Rights, which monitors human rights dissidents, pro-democracy activists, and the abuses they suffer, they say there have been more than 8,000 incidents. I mean, it's just increased exponentially since we announced this new policy.
But in a way, that's good. I mean, in a way, that represents the fact that people are out there taking advantage of this change. And yes, there have been detentions, but they've been short-term detentions. People have been released. So I think that that's part of the transformation. I see that. I mean, I don't like it. I'm not condoning it. I don't suggest that we want short-term detentions. Right. But the point is that it proves that the system is in a sort of elastic stage where people are pulling and then it pulls back a bit and they pull some more. That's part of the change. And I think that it's an indicator that what we did has ignited a new willingness of people to test the limits and to find out what's possible.
Mr. Secretary, we have an ongoing dispute in this community right now because Carnival Cruise Lines, which is a long time, well-established and in many ways philanthropic, member of this community, May 1st it's going to start sending a cruise ship to Cuba. And Cuban-Americans are not going to be sold tickets because they were born in Cuba, and there is this law on the books there that says a Cuban born in this country may not come back by sea, and there is just outrage here that Americans and an American ship sailing out of Miami, that Cuban Americans can't go on this cruise. What do you say to Carnival, or what do you say about the situation?
Well, I know the folks who own Carnival, and I have great respect, and you're right, they are indeed philanthropic, and they've built a tremendous business.
Right. They own a great basketball team, too.
Among many other things. But I would counsel them that they need to be sensitive to the fact of discrimination, and they should not embrace a policy that is Cuban, which winds up discriminating against Americans. Right. There should be no policy in Cuba that prevents somebody by identity, in terms of their nationality, to not be able to travel if they are appropriately visaed and licensed by their country or right. passported by their country to travel. So I would urge them to stand up to this. If Cuba wants cruise ships coming in, and Cuba wants to join the world, and Cuba wants to do business with the world, it needs to recognize it's going to not be able to force its law on everybody else. Right. It's going to have to recognize the global standard, and the global standard is not to discriminate on the basis of nationality.
Mr. Secretary, April 24th, Haiti has scheduled a presidential election. The State Department, the U.S. government has already spent roughly, $30 million to help hold this election. If that election is postponed, what do you say? What will you do?
Well, I think the key is whether or not it is real that the postponement would be for the minimal period of time and that you will have the election. I think it's clear it's going to be very difficult by the 24th and then subsequently for the May date right. for the runoff. So, but we now have a prime minister. We're beginning to move in the direction of getting the government going.
Yeah, not an elected prime minister.
That's correct. It's a transitional situation. And we've been very involved in trying to work this in order to get a government that is legitimate, that is elected by the people. I think that there's a shot here to do that. We don't want to cut off our nose to spite our face, obviously. We really need to see if we can make something come together. But there is a limit. Let me be crystal clear. The Haitian players, the so-called leaders, mm-hmm. need to understand there is a clear limit to the patience and willingness of the international community to condone this process of delay. And the people of Haiti right. deserve an elected government, and they deserve it now. So it's very important that whatever we do has a very clear and absolutely unchangeable outcome.
Mr. Secretary, I must ask you about the situation with Israel. We have a large Jewish community, as you know, in South Florida, and a lot of others, like myself, who care deeply about Israel and its future. Let me just ask you, I mean, this is something where you've worked time and years on the Middle East. Will there ever be a two-state solution?
Well, I believe in the two-state solution. I believe not only that it can happen, I believe it is essential, and it is the only solution in terms of the region, because if you don't have a two-state solution, you have the impossible situation of a unitary state, which by definition cannot be a Jewish state, which right. Israel wants, and cannot be a democracy fully, because it'll be very difficult to divide the rights without establishing what the Palestinians want, which is a state. Right. So you will have constant conflict. If you want to end the conflict, and I do, and I think most people do, you've got to wind up with a negotiation that establishes the two states, meets Israel's...
Are there parties who can...
Let me just finish, because it's very important. Just that meets Israel's security needs. Israel has legitimate, real security needs. Right. And the Palestinians need to understand that. I believe there is a way to satisfy Israel's capacity to defend itself, by itself, to be able to be protected, and to even have an eventuality that protects them against a deterioration in the West Bank or in the region, but still to move forward with a political horizon about a state. And I talk frequently with the Prime Minister, who's a friend, and we've dealt with each other for a long time. I urge him to try to move in that direction, and they must stop the settlements that are stealing this ability to be able to move to the two-state solution.
Secretary, great to speak with you, sir.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Good to be with you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right.
And